Well, earlier this week, I ran into a person in Holland who asked me about our church, and I was telling them how Douglas UCC is part of the United Church of Christ and how progressive and inclusive we are. The first denomination in our history, our church's rich history, to ordain an African American minister, to ordain a woman minister, to ordain a gay minister, and to ordain a transgender minister. And then I asked her about her church, and she said, well, our church is Bible-based. Now, our church is Bible-based, okay? Every week, we hear readings from the Bible, and I teach about them. The readings that we hear each week come from what's known as the Revised Christian Lectionary, and many Christian denominations follow this lectionary. What I love about that is that there's millions of Christians today, be they Episcopalian or Methodist or Lutheran or United Church of Christ, they're all hearing about Jacob's ladder and the parable of the weeds. I love that we're all focused, millions of us around the world, on these same teachings each and every week. Now, the lectionary follows a 3-year cycle. So in 3 years' time, we get to hear the stories from all of the synoptic gospels. Now, if you come to Douglas UCC every week, you know that our first reading usually comes from the Old Testament, but sometimes it comes from the Acts of the Apostles. But our second reading always comes from one of the 4 Gospels, and it is the teachings of Jesus from the New Testament. Now, almost always my homilies are focused on the New Testament, the teachings of Jesus. But today I'm going to do something different, and I'm actually going to speak about the first reading, the Old Testament reading from Genesis about climbing Jacob's ladder, which we see on the front cover of our bulletin today. But before we get to that, I do want to give just a few brief words about Jesus' parable of the weeds. And the reason I want to just talk briefly about it is because last Sunday we covered a lot of this already with the parable of the sower. And if you were here, you remember we said, our minds are gardens, our thoughts are seeds. We can plant flowers or we can plant weeds. Okay, it's up to us. Jesus, in this parable of the weeds, says something similar, that the weeds and the wheat both grow. This parable is sometimes referred to as the parable of the tares, T-A-R-E-S, because tares is a weed that looks very much like wheat in its initial stages. Jesus, in today's gospel lesson, is letting us know, let the weeds and the wheat grow together, because if you pull out the weed, you may inadvertently be pulling out wheat, something good. So symbolically, the thoughts that we have, the positive thoughts, the positive seeds that we sow, end up producing wheat, things that are nourishing and healthy for us and for our world. But the negative thoughts, the negative seeds that we sow, end up producing weeds. They are harmful to our growth. They are destructive to us and our world. Jesus is saying, let them grow together so you can discern the wheat from the weeds. Take the wheat and store it, keep it, but take the weeds and burn them. Now, we know fire in the Bible symbolizes the Spirit, the flame of the Spirit. Jesus understands that all of us, while we're in human form, are going to have positive thoughts and negative thoughts. It's hard not to. It's hard for us to control that. But Jesus is saying, take the negative ones and transform them, purify them in the fire of the Spirit. Now, next Sunday, we're going to hear even more about seeds, because it's going to be the parable of the mustard seed. So we're going to hear more about that next Sunday. But for right now, I want to get to this story of Jacob's ladder from the Old Testament. Jesus, as a very little boy, would have he would have known this story, because this story comes from the Torah, which is the central teachings of Judaism. And Jesus grew up in a good Jewish family. Now, the stories of the Torah are symbolic. They are not literal stories. The ancient Jewish people wrote symbolic stories. Now, there is a reason for that. Most people back then were not well educated. They couldn't read, they couldn't write, they didn't have books in their house. It's unlikely that Jesus had books in his house growing up. What the religious teachers were trying to do is they were trying to teach these really profound and mysterious spiritual principles in a very simple way and in a very memorable way, because these stories were being told orally, so they wanted people to remember them so that they could ponder them and pass them on. So that's why the Torah is full of all of these really dramatic images, like burning bushes and talking snakes and parting seas and ladders to heaven. These are all symbolic. Nobody at that time believed them to be true. No one took them literally. We should not be taking Scripture literally. It wasn't written literally. It was written symbolically. So let's look at this story of Jacob's ladder symbolically, the way it was meant to be understood. Jacob goes out into the wilderness alone. He leaves behind everything. And it is there, alone in the wilderness, that he experiences God and he hears God's voice. Now, Jacob isn't the only person in the Bible to experience this. This happens throughout the Bible. People go out into the wilderness, out into the desert, up to the mountaintop, Moses, Jesus. And out in the wilderness, they experience the presence of God and they hear God's voice. The purpose of these stories isn't to say, wow, look at those special people. It's to say, no, you can experience this too. You can experience the presence of God. You can hear God's voice. What do you have to do? Well, the stories tell us you have to go out into the wilderness. Now, I'm not talking literally. I'm not saying you have to go out into the woods in order to experience God, or go out into a desert. I'm talking symbolically. What does it mean to go out into the wilderness? It means leaving behind the world and going to a special place. This special place, the wilderness, is what's known as a liminal place. It's a place where the earthly realm meets the spiritual realm. It's a place where matter and spirit meet. It's a place where the physical meets the metaphysical. Those of you who know about Celtic spirituality know that they refer to thin places. Thin places are places where the boundary between the earthly realm and the spiritual realm is very thin. When Jacob goes into the wilderness, he goes to one of these places where the earthly meets the spiritual. And we can do it too. And you may say, well, I want to do it. Where is this place? How do I get there? How do I access it? Well, you access it through the ladder. But where is the ladder? Well, if you get our weekly email on Friday, I send out a weekly newsletter every Friday. In the one this past Friday, I had a quote from Saint Isaac, the Christian mystic who lived in the 1st century. And he said this: the ladder to the kingdom of heaven is hidden, and it's hidden within you. It's deep within your soul. Dive down deep, and there you will discover the steps with which you can ascend. Wow. He wrote that in the 1st century. I know some of you may think each week that I'm sharing with you this new age spirituality. This is old age. This is the wisdom of the ages, the truth that never changes. The ladder, the access to God, the ladder between the earthly and the spiritual is hidden within you. If you want to get to that liminal place, that thin space, you have to dive deep within. And there you will discover the ladder, the steps by which you can ascend, by which you can grow in higher consciousness, get to a higher awareness, higher ground. That's what the ladder represents. Jacob, when he discovers this, says, as you heard in the story, how awesome is this place? God is in this place, and I didn't know it. The gate of heaven is here. He was talking about this. How awesome is this place? God is here, and I didn't know it. This is the gate of heaven. It's here. It's within you. Do you remember what Jesus said? He said, the kingdom of heaven is within you. That's where it is. So if you want to experience the presence of God and hear God's voice, you have to go out into the wilderness alone. You have to go deep within you, and there you will discover the steps with which to ascend. Now, as we heard in our words of integration and guidance this morning, Jacob's ladder had 7 steps. And our Hindu and Buddhist brothers and sisters also have steps of ascension that they refer to, which is known as the chakra system. There are 7 chakras. And the purpose of prayer and meditation for our Eastern brothers and sisters is to align those chakras, to connect the earthly with the spiritual. So, when our Hindu brothers and sisters pray, they often do so on the floor, in the lotus position, so that the first chakra, the root chakra, which is at the base of the spine, is touching the earth. And they are having the energy that flows through the body connect with the crown chakra, right at the top of the head here, which opens us up to the spiritual realm. It is why monks of the Christian faith shave their hair here. It is why Jewish men place a yarmulke there. It is to honor that space that connects the earthly with the spiritual. And we connect with that place through prayer and meditation. There are 7 chakras, and there are 7 rungs to Jacob's ladder. Now, 7 again is not a literal number. It's a symbolic number. We hear it throughout the Bible. 7 days of creation, 7 signs, 7 seals, 7 churches. We know that there are 7 seas, that there are 7 colors of the rainbow. It's symbolic, and it means a period of spiritual completion. It represents spiritual completion, the steps, the stages that it takes. And we have to go through those stages, those steps, in order to connect the earthly with the spiritual. So the ladder of spirit is within you. In Jacob's ladder story, notice angels are descending and ascending along the ladder. Angels, as we know, symbolize messengers from God. In prayer and meditation, when we go to that gate of heaven, when we stand at the threshold, we receive messages from God. We hear the voice of God. And did you notice what Jacob said to God? What God said to Jacob. God said, I'm with you no matter where you go. That was the message. No matter where you go, I am with you. Of course, if the kingdom of heaven is within you, that's where God dwells. So wherever you go, God's there. It's why Jesus said, the kingdom of heaven is here and now. It's not later. It's here and now. You already have the ladder. You don't have to get it. It's already there. It's here and it's now, and you have access to it right now through prayer and through meditation and through spiritual practices. Now, some of you might say, Pastor Sal, I think I am just at the first rung of that ladder. I can't believe there are 7. I'm never going to get up there. Some of you may be at the 4th or 5th rung, and that's great. You have had many more years of spiritual practice. It doesn't matter where you are. God is with you each way of the process. The spiritual path is a step-by-step process, and no matter where you are, it's perfect. And God is with you. God is leading you and guiding you as you ascend higher in consciousness. And so what I would like to invite you to do this week is the same homework I've been giving you for the past 2 Sundays, is to find time each day to enter the kingdom, to go within through prayer, through meditation, through spiritual reading. I mentioned a few weeks ago, the word disciple comes from the word discipline. If you are a disciple of Jesus, you must discipline yourself with spiritual practice. So I invite you this week again to go within, to enter the kingdom alone in the silence. Go deep down. You'll see the gate. You'll be at the threshold. You'll see the ladder. And there, know that God is with you and that the Spirit is encouraging you to ascend, to rise to a higher place. Remember, you are always connected to God. Always. Here and now, always and everywhere. Namaste.